Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 1 of my September wrap-up. So before I get into the books that I actually did read and I'm going to review, a couple of things I want to mention. Content warnings and links to everything I talk about are in the description, and I also wanted to update everyone that I mentioned that I extended the reading time for myself for the Maui fundraising, readathon and effort, and so I did end up donating for, I think it was 4 books read, but I'm going to probably try and do that again in the future and just keep working through those books. But I did want to update you that I did that. And then I also wanted to mention that there's one book that I did not end up finishing. It was a book that I originally received for review, which I am very appreciative from the author, and that is Nine of Swords by Brooklyn Quintana. This is a quite long fantasy book, and I just wasn't clicking with the writing. I'll talk about it a little bit in a minute here, but it just wasn't my taste in writing, and especially because the second book is coming out and this is an independently published book, I didn't want to push myself to keep reading something that just was very much not for me, and then kind of, give it a low review when it's something that I knew wasn't my vibe, if that makes sense. The author was very kind about it, so I did just want to mention, talk a little bit about the book here, and so that if it is something that you would enjoy, then you can go and check it out. The writing style is very description heavy. There's especially a lot of focus on setting and kind of those details. So if you like that, it actually reminded me a little bit of, I think A.G. Howard is the author I'm thinking of. So if you like maybe her writing style, this might work for you as well. And I'm also going to link a video by my friend Allie from Allie with Books. They actually did a full review, a spoiler-free review on this one. It's a fantasy involving, I think, a magical school and a lot of politics and everything. And their review is fantastic. So I'll go ahead and link that below so you can get a better idea of if this is going to be for you. So the first book that I finished in the month of September was Poor Miss Finch by Wilkie Collins. This was our Past Classics pick. Julia was the host, and Taylor and I and Julia were all discussing this, and it was a great discussion. I'll link that below. It was pretty divided opinions on this one. Taylor and I did not get along with it, but Julia really enjoyed it. So this is an interesting book because the narrator is not the main character that the story is about. So the narrator is Madame Pratolungo, who ends up becoming a companion for this young woman named Lucilla Finch, the Poor Miss Finch of the title. And Lucilla is blind. She has been blind since she was very, very young. And so this book kind of just follows her life, her growing friendship with Madame Pratolungo, and there's also a lot of humor, and there's also a lot of romantic drama. Kind of the central plot is a love triangle involving Lucilla and 2 identical brothers, which is, a recipe for mess if I've ever heard one. And the identical thing does end up becoming important, even though, as I said, Lucilla has been blind since almost birth. So yeah, this was such an interesting experience. There were things I really enjoyed about it. I really liked the writing style. There was a lot of great humor that I enjoyed. I actually liked Madame Pratolungo as a narrator quite a bit. I thought she was a fun and engaging character, and it was just cool to see her perspective on things. And I thought that Lucilla was, some of the main, drama characters, Lucilla and the 2 brothers, they had their, interesting moments. There were things that really, really frustrated me about them and the book and the way they handled everything and the way that they caused all their own problems, in, a very specific way. But I do think there were some really interesting characterization choices with them. And I also think, something we discussed in the live show is that considering when this book was written or published, which I think was mid-1800s, the portrayal of Lucilla as a blind person, I think, is a lot more thoughtful and compassionate than you would often see from writers in this era. I don't know if Wilkie Collins maybe knew somebody who was sight impaired or something, but it felt fairly respectful, and there were things Lucilla was very much her own character. Her being blind is obviously an important part of her life and experience, but it wasn't her whole personality. So that was a really interesting thing to find in this book. There were of course other sort of its time elements, as with most classics, but I thought for the most part the portrayal of Lucilla was very sympathetic and very dynamic, very rich, she felt like a fully developed person rather than just a character who has this one defining feature. As far as the things I didn't like, so I mentioned how frustrating some of this was. The plot I kind of had a hard time with because it felt like there were these long stretches where not a lot was happening, and then there would be a few chapters that I really enjoyed or I was really engaged in, and then there would be chapters where things were happening, but the things were very frustrating. And obviously, humans in general, we all make decisions that like bring our own problems on ourselves, you know, like that's a given basically. But the thing that I found very annoying about this book is that like the certain way, like the very specific ways that these characters caused their own suffering and also caused other people's suffering in ways that just felt incredibly like just not planning ahead, you know. And so that was very annoying, particularly a specific thing with the love triangle, and it made it so that it was really hard to want like either of the guys to win, you know, to end up with Lucilla. Like they both irritated the crap out of me at different parts of this book. And I knew how the love triangle was going to go because I've read so many like books in this era. Like I knew what was going to happen, but it was frustrating getting there. And then also I really did not like the ending of this book. Like I think if I had been more emotionally engaged in the characters and the romance, I would have been even angrier. As it was, I was just kind of like, really? Like that's what we're gonna do? Like the way the love triangle was resolved is one of my least favorite things. I feel like it is such a cop-out. And it was very like abrupt and jarring, and I didn't like how it was portrayed and how the other characters responded to everything. So anyway, I didn't have a great time with this. I gave Poor Miss Finch 2.5 stars. I do want to try other things by Wilkie Collins. Like I said, I liked his writing, but that was not my favorite. Then I finished a nonfiction book, Climate Optimism by Zara Biabani, celebrating systemic change around the world, and the foreword is by Cristiana Figueres, which I think, because I listened to this on audio and I think the foreword was included. The narrator, by the way, was Jeet Sadi, who I liked but didn't love. Like I think because the audiobook was fairly short, it was fine, but it wasn't my favorite kind of narration for nonfiction especially, but I did enjoy this. This is obviously a nonfiction book about climate change, but about specifically climate optimism, like recognizing the things that we are already changing or that we're already doing well or that we're starting to figure out. And I feel very passionately about this. I think it is so important that we have books like this and that we recognize the things that are going well. And it's for like very practical reasons. Like obviously, yes, it makes us feel better. You know, it can be very bleak to think about how bad things are. So it's nice just emotionally to have some optimism. But I think also in a very practical sense, if you want people to make an effort, then you have to show them that that effort works, you know, that effort matters, that we have already done good things and made positive changes. So this is basically a whole book of that. So I obviously was going to vibe with that. And I really did. I really loved the information here. I'm glad I have a physical copy because there's a lot of like specific examples and stories and statistics that I'm going to want to go back to. I just think this is, yeah, really, really important, like encouraging, but in a way that is still honest. And it is like, you know, galvanizing or inspiring, which I think is incredibly important for a lot of issues that we are facing in the world. So yeah, I thought this was great. I also ended up signing up to Zara Biabani's like email list because she does Earth Winds, you know, like where weekly she sends out an email kind of newsletter that is about important wins for climate that have happened that week, because there is so much good news and we just don't prioritize hearing about it, which I think is understandable because obviously it's the bad news that you need to like do something about to fix. But I think it's important to balance that with knowing that people are doing good. You know, there's a lot of us who do care. There's a lot of people who are already doing things that are having a positive effect on ecosystems and the environment. So yeah, I give this 5 stars. I think it's a really, really important book. And like I keep emphasizing, I think it is very practical as well. Like it's not just an emotional band-aid, you know, to make yourself feel better about how bad things are. It's like genuinely, I think, really important that people know these kinds of things. Okay, next I finished a short story collection that is Phoenix Fled by Atiya Hussein. This is a very short story collection. It's like just over 160, okay, no, it's almost 200 pages, but it's still very short. Atiya Hussein wrote Sunlight on a Broken Column, which I really, really enjoyed. It's considered a classic of like Muslim life, and specifically around the time of partition, and these stories are set around that time as well, and I just really love the way Atiya Hussein writes. Kamila Shamsi also wrote the introduction for this one, which I think is fantastic as well. So these stories are very quiet, they're very like personal, like they're very like focused on the characters and on people's lives and like these very ordinary situations, and people just kind of surviving, you know? And I just love Atiya Hussein's writing so much. I think there is so much beautiful, like, compassion there. Like, she is very, like, she writes with so much clarity and precision, but in a way that is still full of, like, emotional connection. And I just think that the compassion and the respect she has for her characters really shines through. I feel like the concept of, like, human dignity is something that I just really think a lot about when I read her stories. And so even though a lot of these were quite melancholy, like very melancholy, some of them, the collection overall, it didn't feel like heavy or exhausting to read, because I think there was that underlying love and respect, and also because her writing style, I think, is just very, like, pleasant and clear and enjoyable. So yeah, I gave Phoenix Flood 4 stars. I'm sad that Atiya Hussein didn't have anything else like published as far as I know, but yeah, really glad that these are finally in these beautiful new editions. Next, I finished The Sea-Ringed World, Sacred Stories of the Americas by Maria Garcia Esvaron, illustrated by Amanda Mijangos, translated by David Bowles. I really love the, like, layout and kind of color palette. Like, the whole design of this book, I think, is beautiful. So yeah, this is Stories of the Sea-Ringed World, which is what the Aztecs called the Americas. And so these are specifically, like, sacred stories or important religious and cultural stories from various different native groups, from both North and South America, and possibly Central America as well. I can't remember. And there's a lot of variety here. One thing I want to mention is that the way this book is organized, the stories are not, they're not, like, grouped by the native group that tells them, and they're also not grouped by, like, following the same characters, because there are some characters that appear in multiple stories, and those do not all happen together, which I think frustrates some readers, and I can understand that. But I don't know, I kind of wonder if maybe that was so that you would take these stories kind of on their own terms, rather than trying to, like, track the plot, you know, of everything that was happening. But I really liked this. I got a lot out of it. I thought it was very, very interesting and cool to read stories from so many different groups, and there was some overlap, you know, like there's some characters or figures that appear in a lot of them. Like, I really enjoyed the ones that included, I think it was Quetzalcoatl. I thought was a very interesting figure in these stories. I liked the introduction and the way that the authors talk about their intention with sharing these stories that were so deeply important to these groups of people. I thought that was very, like, respectful and very interesting. Something else I think is fascinating is that, unlike, I think, what Western culture thinks of as, you know, like Aesop's fables or that kind of thing, there's not always, like, a clear moral in these stories like there is in, like, fairy tales, for example, which, not that these are considered fairy tales, but it's just very interesting that, like, some of them seem to have a kind of underlying theme or message or idea, and some of them were doing something completely different, and I just thought that was very interesting. Also, this is a great example of how inclusive a lot of older societies were in terms of gender, and a lot of just different things that, like, people sometimes write off as being like, oh, that's a 21st century thing, you know, nobody used to worry about that, nobody used to bother about that, and that's not true. Like, there were ancient societies that were very, very advanced, hundreds or thousands of years ago, that were also thinking, that just had a much more expansive idea of things like gender. And I thought that was very cool that you see that in these stories. I'm really glad I read this. I gave The Sea-Ringed World 4 stars. Definitely recommend it if that kind of, like, topic or focus interests you. Next, I read Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. This is the UK cover. I was very kindly sent this in a giveaway from Margaret at the Word Nerd as part of one of her Vaultathon rounds, and I finally got around to reading it. I did end up listening to this on audio, which I am not usually, like, you guys know that in general I'm pretty sparing with my audiobooks, but also, like, I really don't tend to like romance as audio, but this one I really, really did. The narrator was Isabel Ruther. I thought she was fantastic. Like, I loved the, like, character voices that she used, and I feel like she was really good at narrating characters of, you know, different genders. Like, I really, really loved her performance. So personally, I would recommend the audio, but this is, I feel like everyone knows the premise of this, but just in case you don't, we are following our two main characters, Marcus and April. April's a plus-sized woman who is really, really into this sort of, like, Game of Thrones-esque sort of show. I think Guardians of the Gates is what it's called. And she's really, really into the show, and she's finally, like, moving into a job and into kind of a life situation that she feels a lot more comfortable, like, showing her interests and being herself. So she's getting more into sort of, like, outward fandom stuff, and so she is getting into cosplaying just a little bit. And Marcus is one of the actors on the show, and both of them, unbeknownst to each other, are very active in the Guardians of the Gates like fanfiction and like fandom, like kind of online fandom stuff. And they're actually like best friends online, but they don't realize it when they meet in real life. And the way that they meet in real life is that April posts a picture of her in cosplay as one of the characters, and she gets like some like love and appreciation, but she also gets some really awful fatphobic comments. And Marcus sees this because he was like tagged in this picture, I think, and he's like, I think you look great, and I would love to, you know, go out to dinner with you at some point if you're in the city. And they do actually end up going out on that date, and that ends up developing into a romance. But of course that is complicated by the fact that they actually know each other online, and Marcus ends up realizing that, and April doesn't. So it's about like kind of the ethics of that. There's also a lot at stake as regards like the fandom stuff, because if Marcus has found out that he's been writing and saying some of these things about the show, that would be like a huge breach of his contract. So he could be fired from the show, he could be blacklisted. So there's a lot at stake emotionally and personally for these characters, but also like professionally. And I loved this. I'm so happy I did, because I feel like a lot of people loved it, and then there were a few more negative reviews, and now, so I like wasn't quite sure if I'd get on with it, but I thought this was absolutely wonderful. I love our main characters so much. I just love, like, this is really a romance about like two like really good people like finding each other and it's beautiful. I loved it. There is some conflict, of course, but in general, they're just both so supportive of each other and of other people in their lives. I really loved the friendships that these characters have, and I think the way that it deals with like toxic or abusive like family relationships, I think was very thoughtful. Like most of the book is, you know, this like primarily like happy like love story, but there is kind of that seriousness, and I feel like those things were balanced really well. I just loved April and Marcus just as characters. I love how developed they were. Marcus also has he kind of ended up being like pushed into this like actor persona as being basically like a himbo in the most like derogatory way possible with that term. Everyone thinks he's stupid and just a pretty face, that he has like, you know, absolutely nothing going on in his brain, anything interesting to say. And he's really like wanting to break out of that, but that also could have consequences for his public image. So I just thought like, I really, really loved how much these characters were developed individually as well as their romance together. And also I loved the fandom stuff, and I am not, it's funny because like I obviously love books and I have been like engaged in fandom things before, but I very, very rarely enjoy them in media, especially in books. It just really rubs me the wrong way. Something about the way that it is portrayed, like Fangirl, for example, I really don't like for various reasons, and one of them is like just the fandom culture aspect of it just really grated on me. And I don't know if that's, you know, that very well could just be like personal preference, or it doesn't resonate with my ideas about fandom, but it just always feels very annoying or awkward, or like it doesn't feel genuine or enjoyable to me in most other stories. But I loved it here. I genuinely enjoyed the like messaging between them about the show. I actually liked the fan fiction like snippets that they include, which I never do. Even though like I enjoy fan fiction, but I don't like getting tiny little bits of it out of context in like other stories, but here I did. So I just thought that was fantastic. I loved the like nerdy flirting in this book. I love how body positive it is. Like April is really happy with herself and with her body, and there is kind of some ups and downs in the way that like some days it's easier for her to be confident than others, but this is not a story about her trying to accept herself. Like she's already there, and she's kind of realizing like it's time to tell other people that if you don't want to love me and support me like that, then you can't be in my life anymore, which is, you know, good for her. I love that. Also, there's a lot of like workplace competence, which I love. So there's just a lot of things about this that I really, really enjoyed. The only kind of drawbacks for me is the sex scenes themselves weren't my favorite, which is okay. Like it wasn't a big deal. You guys know I'm picky about those. So they were fine, but they weren't like, I didn't especially like them. And then also the third act breakup was incredibly frustrating, as it always is. But again, that wasn't like a deal breaker for me. Like I still loved so many things about this book. I loved the ending, like not just the ending for the characters, although I do think that the big dramatic gesture of romance thing was a lot less uncomfortable than it usually is, so points for that. But like the scene with like the convention and like the audience question, I loved that. Like truly almost brought tears to my eyes. I thought that was so beautiful, and what a beautiful way to kind of almost end the book on. I just, yeah, thought that was great. So I gave, spoiler alert, 5 stars. like many other people, I loved this. I don't know if I'm going to read the others in the series because, like, kind of the tropes and other things I've heard, I don't know if they would be as much for me, but I don't know, because we get a little glimpse of the characters from the second one, and I really like them, so I don't know. Next, I finished The Center by Ayesha Manazir Siddiqui. This is a horror novel that is, would you call it psychological? I don't know. You guys know I don't read a lot of horror, so I'm not very good at describing it, but this deals a lot with, like, language and translation and colonization, racism. So we are following our main character, Anissa, who dreams of being a translator of, like, great works of literature, and it's just not really happening for her. She doesn't feel like she's doing very important work, and that's really getting her down, and she ends up dating this boy, this man named Adam, who is white, and he, just one day, he, like, shows up and he's learned Urdu to, like, surprise her and to surprise her family. And she's like, what do you mean you, like, learned it in a week? Like, no, I don't believe you. And he finally does get her to believe him, and she, like, makes him tell her what happened, like, how he did this. And it turns out that he went to this program that, like, it's at this place called The Center, and it's, like, very, very elite, very secret, and very strict about its rules. Like, basically you're cut off completely from society for, like, I think 2 weeks. Like, no phones, no, like, outside contact. You have to do, like, everything they say at the center, like, and it's very, very secret to people in the program, but also, like, people outside. And you end up learning, like, a new language, like, becoming completely fluent in a new language in that 2-week period. And so, you know, things aren't going so well for her, so Anissa finally decides, like, what the heck, I'll try it. And so she goes. And there ends up being a lot of sinister things happening at the center that she sort of finds out about, like, throughout the book. And it has been a while since I had such wildly different feelings about a book at the beginning versus the end, because, like, the first 2/3 of this I was really, really enjoying. Like, I thought the tension was fantastic. I thought, like, the building, like, unease and, like, horror was done really well. Like, I had figured out what was going on, but the tension was so good that it didn't bother me. I thought Anissa was a really fascinating main character because I didn't realize right away how, like, actually unlikable she was until, like, midway through the book. And I thought that was super interesting, the way that was done, because, like, you still cared about her even when she was being, like, kind of awful as a person. And I thought that the themes around colonization and racism, and how those things interact with, like, language and culture and translation, I thought that was fascinating. Like, I was really liking that. I had a couple of, like, I don't know, things I was a little wary about. Like, there was some, like, portrayal or representation things that I thought were, you know, maybe not the best. And then also there was like a scene, or maybe more than a scene, that was very uncomfortable about, like, Anissa and her boyfriend Adam, where basically she had to, like, pressure him into having sex with her, and that was, like, treated as, like, a funny thing or an embarrassing thing for Anissa, or, like, something that was about her hurt feelings, rather than the fact that her boyfriend was, he was having sex without his consent. And that really wasn't challenged by the book at all. So there were a couple of things that I was like, oh, I don't know about this, but overall I was really, really liking the book. But then the last third just completely lost me. Like, it really, I did not end up having a good time with this book, because, like, the last third, the things that happen and the way things are written and portrayed, it is tied so much to the things that happen in the other part of the book that you really, in my opinion, you can't really compartmentalize and be like, well, I still like the book overall because this much of it was good, you know, or was well done. So, like, specifically, the issues that I mentioned being a little uneasy about, they did not get resolved, and in fact they got worse in terms of some of the, like, portrayal. There's been, for example, there's been several Own Voices Muslim reviewers who have talked about the representation in this book and how it's portrayed in a way, it's not just like that the characters are portrayed in a way that is inaccurate, but it's, like, never even, like, discussed as being inaccuracy. So that was an issue. And then also the thing with Adam, I feel like continued to be handled just really, really horribly, and in a way that was really, really uncomfortable to read. So that was an issue. And then also the big reveal, when it finally happens, like I said, I knew what was going on. I had figured it out, which was not a problem in itself. But when the big reveal finally happens, I absolutely hated how it was completely brushed off by the characters. Like, it really bothers me. I don't think it was handled well at all. And I don't even feel like it was done in a way where, you know, the author is saying something about like complicity in these like abusive systems or anything. Like it didn't feel like commentary to me, at least. And also like related to the reveal, the like friendships, there are two very, very close friendships that Anissa has, and both of them end up being kind of horrible people. Like one of them for sure. And then the other one, it's like this friend is finally like, you need to tell somebody, you need to report this. And I'm like, yes, finally, somebody who has like a moral compass. And then that just turns into like, you need to write something about it for your own personal catharsis. And that's what matters more than like protecting other people from this. And I hate that. I really, really don't like that. And again, I'm not saying that books can't have unethical people, but like the way that you write something matters. And I don't think this book was doing commentary as far as those ethical things. And like also the fact that we are supposed to be torn about like this one, about the other friendship, and like, you know, how like invested Anissa is, and how like, oh, she wants to do the right thing, but she also really cares about this person, so maybe it's not that bad. It just really didn't work for me. I think that if that was how we were supposed to feel about this character, things should have been written a lot different. I just really hated that. Like, I could not buy that as part of the story because it made no sense to me. Like, there was no reasoning for it. And also kind of related to that, I guess, is I found Anissa an absolutely reprehensible person by the end of this book. And I don't mean like, oh, an unlikable character. I mean like a despicable, despicable person. Like the things that she does and goes along with. And again, I thought maybe that this was going to be a book that was intentionally saying something about complicity. But in my opinion, it didn't. It was kind of one of those books that just like does the bad things or shows the bad things and thinks that that is the same as commentary, which I personally don't agree with. So like it was very hard to like enjoy or be invested in this book when I ended up hating the main character so much because of the choices and her reasoning and like the way that she like treated people. Like I don't think Anissa was supposed to be as unlikable as I felt about her by the end. And then kind of my last point, and I've sort of been like alluding to this throughout, but like I feel like the ending chunk of this book absolutely destroyed the themes that it was supposed to be tackling. Again, this is all like in my opinion, like other people found it very effective. I did not though. I feel like the last third, and especially like the ending, like the last few chapters of this book, just absolutely destroyed any kind of commentary that this book was maybe doing. Like, I don't feel like it ended up saying anything especially like effective about these issues of class and racism and colonization and how those things interact with language and translation. And again, I think that this book could have said something about complicity, about people, you know, having this internalized sort of like self-hatred and how that can like lead them to do these bad things. I think that could have been a good story and a very interesting story, but I don't feel like that's what this book did. And I also think that the complete lack of resolution for the things that were happening in this book did not feel meaningful or well written or intentional. And I feel like I always have to like defend myself by saying that it's not that I never like books that have this kind of like unsatisfying kind of conclusion, because I think there are ways to do those things very well. Like an example I've talked about before is Asking for It by Louise O'Neill. The way that book ends and the way things like play out, I think it's gutting, and it is intentionally unsatisfying as a reader, but it is in a way that is well written and meaningful and like intentional. Like it is a very specific choice that the author handles very well and very sensitively, and there is a point to it. And I feel like with this book, it didn't feel like that to me. Yeah, so anyway, I was loving this book so much at the beginning, and by the end, I really, really didn't like it. I ended up giving The Center 2 stars. Like, I'm glad I tried it. because like I was very intrigued by the idea of this one, but I just personally, I think that if this author was intending to tackle these themes and these ideas, I think that there were a lot of different ways she could have gone about it, in terms of the story and the plot and the characters. And for me, I don't feel like she achieved any of those. Like, based on her story and characterization choices, I don't think she did any kind of variation of those things in a way that I found meaningful or satisfying or effective. So, yeah, 2 stars. Not my favorite. And then finally, the last book I'm going to talk about in this part of the wrap-up is Silver Nitrate by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is her newest release. It was my my annual buddy read with my lovely friend Yvette from Book Cave. We always end up buddy reading a Sylvia Moreno Garcia book, and I love it. Yeah, so unsurprisingly, I loved this. Like, this author is one of those where, like, it almost doesn't even matter what, like, genre or what kind of story, because her writing and her ideas and her, like, characterization and, like, the kinds of themes that she tackles in her books, they all just vibe with me so well that I end up liking things. Like, this is like a noir kind of, like, psychological horror a little bit, kind of like a mystery-ish sort of book, which are not things I tend to enjoy. Like, I'm not a horror person, I'm not like a mystery thriller person, but I love this. I was expecting to love it, but I was not expecting it to end up in, like, my highest tier of, like, Sylvia Moreno Garcia favorites, so that's very cool. I haven't told you anything about what this is about. So, this is set in, what decade is it? In the 90s in Mexico City. Our main characters are Montserrat and Tristan. So it's a dual point of view, and the two of them have been friends for a really, really long time. Montserrat, or Momo, has been, like, very in love with Tristan for a very, very long time, and they've kind of just sort of, like, tried to forget about that and, like, move on. So they're just really good friends now. And Momo is a film editor, and it's kind of like a boys' club, like, very misogynistic. She doesn't get appreciated for her work, even though she's the most talented one there, and it's very, very frustrating for her, even though she's very talented and great at her job. And I also really liked seeing just, like, the details about, like, the film industry and film editing. I thought that was super cool. And Tristan is like a former soap opera star. He's trying to, like, stay in the acting world, but he's not getting a lot of work. Part of that is because of some tragic history in his past that we end up finding out more about as the book goes. And then one day Tristan discovers that the new neighbor, like a new person who lives in his apartment building, is like a renowned, like, horror director who he and Momo really, really love and enjoy. And he kind of, like, dropped out of the film world. It was very weird. Like, he had a couple of, like, cult favorite movies and then, like, nothing. And so they end up sort of becoming friends with this man, and he insists to them that the reason for his kind of lack of success after that is because of a curse. It involves, like, Nazi occultists and like, casting spells using, like, the silver nitrate of the film, like, of these, like, film reels and everything, and it ends up turning into something much more dangerous than Tristan or Momo had suspected. They're seeing ghosts. They're being followed by, like, sinister, like, things or, like, presences, and so it gets, like, there's some, I think, very creepy atmosphere that is done really, really well, and it does get pretty dark in places, and I feel like that was like conveyed and dealt with, like, appropriately. So yeah, I loved this. I thought this was so good. It's interesting because, like, in terms of, like, the genre combination and, like, the pacing, I think you could compare this most to Velvet Was the Night, which I also enjoyed, but I liked Silver Nitrate even more. I just feel like the atmosphere and the tension are fantastic. Like, if you want, like, a fast-paced, like, lots of twists and turns kind of, like, action thriller, this is not that, and you're gonna be very disappointed. Sylvia Moreno Garcia doesn't tend to write, like, mysteries like that, but she writes ones that I really enjoy because it's about, like, the atmosphere and the tension and the characters and the themes. And I really love that so many of, especially her more recent books, like this one and Mexican Gothic, and The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, I feel like a lot of her recent books have been dealing with like, the concept of eugenics and the ways that that can show up in society, and just how incredibly, like, awful and harmful that is. Like, I just think the way that she criticizes that, and colonization and racism and sexism, like, I just love the themes that she incorporates in her stories. So, like, I love the stories themselves, but I also love what she says with them. And so I appreciated that about Silver Nitrate as well. I also think Tristan and Momo are incredibly well done characters. Like, they could be, like, especially Tristan, he could be very, very frustrating, but I still cared about him, which, like, Yvette and I discussed was basically how Momo felt about him, so it was funny that our experience sort of mirrored that, but I really, really cared about them. I wanted them to be okay. I was invested in their story and in finding out more about their past, both with each other and just like, you know, as individual characters. So yeah, I thought this was absolutely brilliant. I enjoyed this even more than I was expecting to. I can see that it would not be for everybody, but it really, really worked for me. And I gave Silver Nitrate 5 stars. Okay, everybody, so those were the first group of books I read in September. Please comment down below. Let me know if you have read any of them, what you thought, or if you're interested in picking them up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!